In a single Appalachian valley, in a winter near the end of the 1700s, two houses stood less than a mile apart. The first was built of round logs, stacked and notched. Solid, square, straight-edged. Exactly the kind of house you'd picture. It was raised by people who had arrived carrying iron axes, iron nails, and the quiet certainty that they came from a more advanced world. The second house was low and round and covered over in packed earth and tree bark, the kind of thing those newcomers glanced at once and dismissed as a primitive little hut. And by February, one of those two houses was still warm, still dry, and burning almost no firewood to stay that way. The other was full of drafts, creeping with black mold in the corners, and swallowing wood faster than a family could cut it. Here's the part that's going to bother some of you. The house that won was not the one made of wood. That winning house was built from four things: clay, bark, wood, and fire. No electricity, no insulation, not one iron nail in the entire structure. And it outperformed the civilized house next door in every way that actually mattered when the temperature dropped. So let go of that image of a crude little shelter right now. What the settlers called primitive was, in fact, a living system, and it would take them the better part of a century to understand that. Which leaves us with three questions, and I'm going to answer all three before we're done. First, why did the civilized house lose to the primitive one, on the home turf of the cold, no less? Second, the material that decided this whole contest was not the hardest or the strongest thing in either house. It was something you are standing on right now. And third, this house was born. It grew, and one day it would die in a way that not a single house any of us live in today is capable of. I'm saving that one for the very end. So let me walk you through both houses.
And by the time we're finished, you can decide for yourself who was really the backward one. Everybody assumes solid wood is a great material for staying warm. It isn't. A wall of stacked logs has two problems, and in an Appalachian winter, both of them can kill you. The first is the seams. Between every single log runs a gap, and cold wind finds each one. The settlers spent their winters packing mud into those gaps over and over. Chinking, they called it. And the mud kept drying, cracking, and falling right back out. So the work was never actually done. The second problem is worse, because it's built into the wood itself. As logs dry, they shrink. The whole wall slowly opens its mouth, gap by gap, and it opens widest exactly when the air gets coldest and driest, which is precisely when you need that wall sealed tight. The advanced house was fighting its own material all winter long. The Cherokee wall had no seams to fight, because it was never built in pieces.
A frame of hardwood, laced across with a continuous basket of flexible green saplings, and then clay. Clay mixed with natural fiber, grass, sometimes animal hair, pressed into that weave from both sides until the lattice vanished completely. When it dried, it wasn't a stack of parts anymore. It was one single shell, hard as stone, with nowhere for the wind to get a grip. And here's the thing the settlers never understood. Earth holds heat far better than wood does. A wooden wall warms up fast and cools down just as fast. The fire dies, and the house is cold within the hour. A thick clay wall drinks in heat all day long, holds onto it, and then releases it slowly, hour after hour, long after the flames have gone to embers. Engineers today call that thermal mass. The settlers called it Indian magic, even as they sat shivering inside their own progress. So let me answer the second question I promised you. The material that beat an entire civilization wasn't iron, and it wasn't better lumber. It was dirt. The exact thing they were standing on and never thought to look down at. Even the shape was losing the contest for them. The Cherokee house was round, fewer faces turned to the wind, less surface for heat to bleed through, and no dead corners where cold could pool and sit. Warmth from the center moved evenly through the whole room. Every curve was doing a job. And that square log cabin next door? Its 4 sharp corners were 4 straws, quietly sucking the heat straight out into the night. And this points to the deepest difference between the two houses, not in how they performed, but in how they came to exist at all. The settlers built their house. In a few weeks, with axes and force, they imposed a shape onto a pile of logs. The Cherokee did something closer to growing theirs, over seasons, by letting the forest hand over one piece of itself at a time when each piece was ready to be given. This was a house that kept a calendar. The saplings for the lattice were cut when they were still green and full of sap, so they'd bend into the weave without snapping. The clay was taken when the ground held the right moisture, from specific deposits they knew would cure hard and last. And the building itself was timed to the dry season, so that clay could set slowly and evenly instead of cracking in a rush. Hardwood frame, then the woven basket of saplings, then layer after patient layer of earth. Over the whole shell went bark, harvested in wide sheets, and laid down overlapping like shingles, shedding freezing rain and melting snow off the frame beneath, its rough layers trapping small pockets of dead air, one more quiet blanket. And through all of it, not one nail. Every joint was lashed with natural cordage, and that was a deliberate choice, not a limitation. A nail holds wood rigid, and rigid wood cracks when the humidity swings. A lashed joint lets the whole frame swell and shrink with the seasons, the entire structure breathing along with the weather. The house aged alongside the forest. Even the smoke was doing work. Rising through the roof, it cured and hardened the timbers overhead, drove out the insects that would otherwise eat the frame, and constantly flushed the air inside clean. And that air moved on a simple, beautiful logic. A smoke hole high in the roof, pulling against a doorway set deliberately low. Cold air is heavy, so it stayed down near the floor and slid straight toward the fire waiting to consume it, while the warm air stayed up high, around the people, and never spilled out. Now, think back to the cabin next door.
Its door opened straight out at chest height, and every single time it swung, a whole wave of heat rolled out into the dark. That low, awkward little doorway the settlers laughed at, it turned out to be one of the things keeping the people inside alive. So come back to that valley now, deep in February. Inside the log cabin, the settler wakes in the middle of the night because the cold has pulled him out of sleep, and he feeds another log to a fire that is never quite enough, because the heat rushes straight up and leaks out through every seam faster than the flames can replace it. The damp clothing hung by the hearth never fully dries. A line of black mold has started creeping down the north corner where the wall meets the floor. And the woodpile is going down faster than any one family can swing an axe to replace it. Less than a mile away, in the earth house, a fire a fraction of that size is keeping more people warm, all night, and nobody has to wake up to feed it.
The clay walls are handing back the heat they stored during the day, slowly, steadily, hour after hour. And when snow settles over the roof, it becomes one more blanket. The very storm the settler is cursing is the thing helping the house next door. And that difference ran deeper than temperature. The cabin was a place to endure the winter. The earth house was a place to live it. Around that central fire, elders told the stories that held an entire history in place. Craftsmen mended tools for a spring still months away. Women wove baskets and worked the stored food that would carry everyone to the thaw. Children learned by watching and then by doing. That fire wasn't just warming a family. It was where a whole people rewrote themselves out loud every single night. And here is the ending history rarely bothers to tell you. The settlers started copying it.
Across many parts of the frontier, they quietly borrowed, daubing mud and earth over their walls, setting their doors lower, digging their floors deeper into the ground. The people who came to civilize this land ended up having to relearn how to live on it from the very people they'd called primitive. And that answers the first question I asked you at the start. The civilized house didn't lose because it was weak. It lost because it was arrogant. It tried to impose a house from somewhere else instead of listening to the place it was actually standing. None of this was luck, and none of it was quick. They cut their timber in the season the wood was least likely to rot or draw insects. They took their clay from the specific deposits they knew would hold. They timed the whole build so the walls could dry slowly without cracking. Their craft leaned on patience as much as on skill. And today we've given every piece of what they did an expensive-sounding name. Thermal mass, passive heating, natural ventilation. And we sell it back to each other as cutting-edge design. But I won't tell you the Earth House was better than the one you're sitting in right now. That would flatten a much richer story than that. Their achievement was never building the best house. It was building the right house, for that exact place. And that is the thing we have very nearly forgotten how to do. Which brings me to the promise I made at the very start. How this house died. This is the best part. An Earth House lived 20, 30 years. And then one day, the people moved on. No one came to feed the fire. No one climbed up to patch the roof. And the house did not leave a ruin behind. It left no concrete that would sit there for 1,000 years. No plastic, no metal, no chemicals bleeding into the ground. The rain came, and the clay softened and went back to being soil. The bark and the wood rotted down into the kind of dark earth that feeds young trees. Within a few seasons, the house dissolved back into the very forest that had grown it, leaving nothing but a ring in the ground where the grass came in a little greener than everywhere else. We build houses that don't know how to die. They just fail, and they hand the burden to 100 years of people who come after us. The Cherokee built a house that knew how to die gracefully. And maybe that's the real definition of the word sustainable. Not a house that lasts forever, but a house that knows how to give back everything it borrowed. They did not conquer nature. They learned from it, and then they returned all of it. A resilient home isn't measured by how long it stands. It's measured by what it leaves behind when it's gone.